So today I want to talk about Roe v. Wade and Justice Alito's draft opinion on the Dobbs versus Jackson's Women Health Organization case that will likely lead to the end of federal abortion rights in the United States. Now, when this draft came out at the beginning of May, I was furious, to say the least. I was still in a place where I was really unable to make videos, and all I wanted to do was to get in front of the camera and to scream about the injustice that was taking place. Despite anarcha-feminists and really feminists of all varieties having recognized both the frailty and imperfections of Roe v. Wade since the decision was made in 1973, and despite seeing this as kind of inevitable as the Supreme Court was stacked with conservative justices, seeing that draft leaked cemented a deep-seated fear into reality. The reality that Roe v. Wade, a decision that has protected safe legal abortions throughout the United States, is about to fall. This draft has so many implications to it, and it breaks an already inadequate compromise between a human right and the power of the state. And it also lays the framework for even more harm in the near future, as it sets precedents for the removal of more rights by the state. Now, there are so many angles that this needs to be looked at from, and each of these angles are interwoven with all of the rest. So for the next videos on this channel, I'll be examining several of those angles and discussing them in depth. These include the immediate danger that this brings to the lives of those seeking abortions, how conservatives have been planning this since the Roe v. Wade decision came down in 1973, why the Democrats can't protect Roe v. Wade, the inadequacy of the state to protect rights, the legal justifications for Roe v. Wade under the state, how Roe v. Wade was actually a denial of human rights by the state, and the precedent of this decision and the rights that it will influence next. So let's start by talking about the immediate danger of this draft. Now, despite the fact that most of you probably already know this, I want to make sure that everyone's on the same page before I continue with this. So let's take a moment to recap what's been happening thus far. Now, at the beginning of May, Justice Alito's draft opinion was leaked, and within the text of the leak for his opinion on the court case was the justification to completely overturn federally legal abortions. While this has not been made official yet, it's likely to be made official within the very near future. Now, as soon as federal legality is overturned and abortion is no longer constitutionally protected by the Supreme Court, the issue of a person's right to choose to terminate a pregnancy falls entirely into the hands of individual states, meaning that in 22 states, the right to have an abortion will be abolished or effectively abolished via things like 6-week bans. And as soon as this decision is made official, this is what's going to happen. Now, it's believed that 4 other states will follow shortly after with either total bans or these similar highly restrictive bans. And before I continue forward, I'd like to emphasize that these 6-week or heartbeat bans, as they're being called, are in fact effective bans on abortion. First of all, 6 weeks, it would be too early for many people to even realize they were pregnant if it was actually 6 weeks from the moment of conception. However, that's not how things are usually defined. Pregnancy, in terms of abortion, is usually defined from the date of one's last period, meaning that for some people, if we actually assume a regular period cycle, which is, of course, not guaranteed, some people may only be 2 weeks pregnant when they would be legally turned away from an abortion. And that is far too early for one to tell that they are pregnant. Now, I want to pause for a moment and take a look at this graphic on screen. The states that are shown in orange here are the 26 states that are likely to ban abortion as soon as the Supreme Court overturns the decision. I'm going to show on screen the 22 states that will pretty much either have trigger bans or will have effective 6-week bans come into play. So you can take a look at that list on screen. And the 4 states that are likely to ban abortion in the near future are Florida, Indiana, Montana, and Nebraska. So between all of this, we kind of get an idea how basically the entire center and southern part of the United States, abortion will be effectively illegal pretty much once this decision comes down. That'll leave 24 states that do not have abortion banned, and 26 states where it will be completely banned. So, what does this mean? Well, ultimately, it does not mean the end of abortion at all. However, it does mean that things just got a lot harder for a lot more people who want or need to terminate a pregnancy. As economic inequality has done for some of the most oppressed people and populations across the world, really, this new ruling will lead to an increase in the number of people who may experience things like the destruction of livelihoods, dangerous physical or mental harm, and effectively having their bodies turned into violently controlled incubators for the state. The way this is going to manifest is that first, we're likely to see doctors who have performed and oversaw these procedures no longer being willing to do so, at the very least in the open. The risk to doctors will be seen as too great, and many will choose not to practice or will choose to relocate to other states, the 24 states in which it will be legal, leaving people in those 26 states effectively there to fend for themselves. Now, we saw this happen in Texas when the Supreme Court upheld Texas SB 8. Now, I covered the effects of that and predicted a lot of what's happening right now in that video that I made a while ago talking about SB 8. So if you want to look back at that video and check it out for some additional information, I'm going to leave the link in the description down below. Now, I need to also highlight that there are, without a doubt, a bunch of people coming to term right now that are only having children because of SB 8 and its effects that are causing this very heartbreaking reality where people no longer have choice over their own bodily autonomy. That said, anything that happened in Texas is now likely to be spread over 26 states, which means that any difficulties that Texans experienced will be greatly expanded and exaggerated. Those with enough wealth and resources may be able to travel to one of the other 24 states or Mexico to acquire medical care from a doctor. But with 26 states losing facilities, appointments in the remaining 24 states and northern Mexico will likely become even harder to come by. People who, at this moment in time, would need to only travel, say, 10 to 15 miles for care may need to travel hundreds of miles now. As an example, if you're someone in the area of Jackson, Mississippi, where there is a clinic currently and it does exist, and you were to, go through and have to travel to your next closest clinic after Roe v. Wade is overturned, that would mean traveling upwards of 600 miles to either North Carolina or Illinois. If those facilities either start to fill with appointments or overflow, or there's a lack of ability to get to those particular facilities for some reason, then we could see people needing to travel upwards of 800 miles instead to get to either Virginia, Kansas, or Mexico in order to acquire care. And that is a really difficult thing to expect for people, to have to travel those great distances in order to get the care that they need and to maintain their bodily autonomy. Between the economic cost of traveling, the overwhelming wait lists that will form, the fact that working class people often can't take off work, the fact that some people cannot travel either due to immigration status, disability, or other factors, and that some people may in fact have kids that already need their time and care, and they just don't want to have another child because they have enough, or they can't maintain or take care of another one, or choose not to, we are going to see people in that situation forced into a situation where they have to travel these great distances in order to terminate their pregnancy. And the people that this is going to primarily affect is, of course, going to be poor people and those from oppressed groups. They are always the first groups to be targeted, and that has actually been the case when it's come to any form of access to abortion, and they have often been removed from the conversations around abortions. People in those economic and social situations, because of the nature of how we've defined things via rights and the state. Now, this will leave many with little to no alternative but to look up at home means of acquiring an abortion. And while some of these options are still quite medically safe and are used globally, for many it may not be the same as having a medical professional there to guide them through the process. And at certain points in pregnancy, having a medical professional there would make things a lot safer. And even with those safe procedures, many may not have access to information or resources, especially if someone is internet illiterate in this day and age or doesn't have access to getting on a computer or the internet. It can be often difficult to find out this information if you don't have people in the know that you can rely on. And, also the pills necessary can be potentially expensive for those who are struggling financially, especially those in extreme poverty. On top of it all, with as overbooked and overburdened as everyone is going to be in trying to perform damage control, I would really not be surprised if we saw a reemergence of things like back alley abortions and other unsafe and dangerous procedures that may leave many more in the morgue, just like back in the day. And that's not a reality that I want to see happen, nor is it a reality that I think should happen. We have the means to provide care for people, and we're just ultimately choosing not to. To make matters worse, if one does decide to abort or terminate a pregnancy, that doesn't mean that they're cleared from the violence of the state. Depending on the laws of each individual state and where one is located, every action that one takes to get an abortion and secure bodily autonomy may be construed as an illegal act in which state violence could be administered as a response. While this will likely be extremely hard to enforce in many instances, it could lead to law enforcement targeting some of the most vulnerable populations first. This could lead to a lot of fines and arrests, and I need to point out that arrests by themselves can have long term implications and problems for people's lives. People can have records that they were arrested, and just from that arrest record, even if they are not convicted of anything, this could lead to long term issues in terms of how they live their life. Jobs might not want to hire people, especially if they have to disclose that. And there's so many other things that go into the stress and anxiety of being arrested, of dealing with having to maintain court dates and legal proceedings and everything else, acquiring a lawyer, and just all that goes into being arrested is in and of itself already an issue in the way that the criminal justice system functions. And of course, that's not even factoring in that all of that could lead to potential jail time. Now, when we look at this, doctors could also face significant prison time for performing or helping with abortions, but today I'm really primarily focused on the patients themselves, where you have situations in states like Texas where anyone who performs, induces, or attempts an abortion where an unborn child dies as a result of the offense is guilty of a first-degree felony punishable by up to life in prison. That means if you take a pill in order to induce abortion in yourself and they can somehow prove that, you could get up to life in prison with a $10,000 fine under the state's current trigger ban. In Alabama, anyone who performs an abortion, provides abortion pills, or aids, abets, or prescribes for the same faces up to 12 months in county jail or hard labor and a fine of up to $1,000 under the state's pre-Roe ban. And so, what that, of course, means, again, if you uh, help somebody get their medication, you could, in fact, face this reality. And that's worded in such a way that it probably includes the person who maybe takes pills to induce abortion themselves. And in a place like South Carolina, a person who ends their pregnancy with either a pill or by other means can face up to 2 years in prison and a fine of up to $1,000 under state law. And these are just some examples. Others are listed on Politico's website. And when we look at all of this, we see that the criminality here that's going to kick in is going to have a substantial impact on people's lives. And the thing is, it needs to be recognized that even with these laws, it's extremely difficult to prove that one took a pill as opposed to having a miscarriage by any other means. But there's two things that really need to be taken into account when we accept that reality. One is that some people have actually already been charged for having miscarriages. As a matter of fact, there's plenty of examples of this. BBC has this link where we find that a 21-year-old Native American woman from Oklahoma was convicted of manslaughter after having a miscarriage. People were outraged, but she was not alone. She was convicted and sentenced to 4 years in prison for first-degree manslaughter of her, quote, unborn son, because she lost a baby in the hospital. Like this is the kind of reality that a lot of people already experience in a pre-overturning of Roe world. And this could be made that much worse, where a lot of people from, again, the most vulnerable populations are targeted and are convicted for having miscarriages or put in these circumstances. And Planned Parenthood has on their website. Last June, this was written in 2019. A 27-year-old African American woman was indicted by Alabama grand jury on manslaughter charges when she lost her 5-month-old fetus after being shot. The person who shot Jones, whom the police claimed was acting in self-defense, was not charged in the shooting. Jones, however, was held responsible for being in a fight while pregnant and faced up to 20 years in prison. Unfortunately, Jones's case is not that unique. Since Roe v. Wade, there have been several cases in which women were arrested for miscarriage or stillbirth. Criminalizing pregnancy loss casts pregnant people as vessels rather than people. Now, that's something that I want to emphasize. When I talk about somebody being made a violent vessel for the state or being an incubator for the state, that's what I'm really talking about. They're being violently coerced by the state in order to carry their pregnancy to term, and if they don't, they face other forms of violence from the state. We also see that in Arkansas, 5 women have been arrested for stillbirth or miscarriage, 3 between 1884 and 1994, 1 in 2015, and another in 2016. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, that's still kind of absurd that even in one state that there's 5 people been arrested for having a stillbirth or miscarriage. Another example that we can look at is in 2016, where a person gave birth to a stillborn baby in their home. She went to the doctor to receive necessary medical care afterward, only to be arrested. An autopsy showed that the baby had died between 30 and 32 weeks into pregnancy, and she was sentenced with 5 months in prison for concealing a dead body, despite the fact that the fetus had already died in the womb. Although the Virginia governor pardoned her, an appellate court had already upheld her conviction. And so this is the type of thing that we're looking at. Again, this is what's going to manifest in the near future when we look at how abortion affects, these abortion laws being overturned affects people's lives. Miscarriages may in fact be turned into convictions. And we also have to accept the reality that we, as the second point to this, we live in the digital age, and compromising data and information is with us at all times on our phones, on our computers, on our laptops, on whatever devices we may have. We carry compromising data with us at all times. And in addition to that, there are companies, organizations like Google, Microsoft, Apple, etc., who all take in our information. And when we consider that the justification cited by the courts for protecting Roe v. Wade was privacy, um, and I'll go into more details about what that entails entirely in a later video in this series. I just need it known that if privacy is the thing being effectively overturned in Justice Alito's decision, it effectively could mean that nobody's protected to privacy when it comes to actions to receive abortion care. And that's really scary because if you research abortion and if you're in one of those 26 states, you might be in a situation where you might have to accept the reality that bank records, phone conversations, text messages, emails, phone location data, and even your search history may in fact be used against you in a court of law. And that's a really disturbing reality to accept. Scientific American actually covered this, and they wrote the following. A smartphone can be a massive storehouse of personal information. Most people carry one at all times, automatically registering their daily activities through internet searches, browsing, location data, payment history, phone records, chat apps, contact lists, and calendars. Your phone knows more about you than you do. There is data on your phone that could show how many times a day you go to the bathroom. Things are that incredibly intimate, says Evan Greer, the director of the nonprofit digital rights organization Fight for the Future. If, because of these draconian laws, basic activities like seeking or providing reproductive health care become criminalized in a manner that would allow law enforcement to get an actual warrant for your device, it could reveal incredibly sensitive information, not just about that person, but about everyone that they communicate with. Even with Roe intact, this type of digital footprint has already been used to prosecute those seeking to terminate pregnancies. In 2017, a woman in Mississippi experienced an at-home pregnancy loss, and a grand jury later indicted her for second-degree murder, based in part on her online search history, which recorded that she had looked up how to induce a miscarriage. So even just looking up that information was enough to have her indicted. Now, the charges were eventually dropped against this particular woman. However, that doesn't change the traumatic experience of having, again, to go through the entirety of a court case. And what I mentioned previously is I wouldn't be surprised if companies like Google and Microsoft were either voluntarily going to or requested by the state to give up information on individuals to help assist with these type of court cases in the near future. And I'm far from the only person to have this concern. In fact, 40 Democratic members of Congress actually called on Google to stop collecting and retaining customer location data that prosecutors could potentially use to identify people who obtain abortions. Quote, we are concerned that in a world in which abortion could be made illegal, Google's current practice of collecting and retaining extensive records of cell phone location data will allow it to become a tool for far-right extremists looking to crack down on people seeking reproductive health care. That's because Google stores historical location information about hundreds of millions of smartphone users, which it routinely shares with government agencies. And so if even the Democrats are concerned about this reality, and there are a number of Congress members, advocating for this, I think this is something that we need to seriously consider. Again, especially as the justification for Roe v. Wade was based around the concept of privacy, and privacy may no longer be something that's allowed to be used as a justification. And therefore, we might see people get more and more law enforcement getting access to these devices, which may lead to more and more arrests. And again, that's a scary and frightening situation and reality to be in. Now, I want to take a moment and say that I need to emphasize before I continue that I believe that abortion is a human right. It's an issue of bodily autonomy that nobody should have a right to dictate on. except the person making the decision to have the abortion. That said, I also believe that it's a social issue that needs to be publicly spoken about as a normal part of life and daily conversation. It's not a taboo to hide, but something that is experienced and people go through on a day to day basis. I do not believe that we should continue to allow shame and guilt to rule the conversation, and I especially believe that the state has no business casting its judgment on the matter. And I also believe that people should have full access to abortion for any reason, as I do not think anyone should have to give a reason for justifying why they want to maintain their bodily autonomy. That said, we live in an imperfect world. So I know there's many of you who might be watching this who believe that abortion is something that needs to be restricted or held to a certain standard. And even if I vehemently disagree with you, which I do, I want to emphasize this particular perspective for those of you who might feel that way. Many of these state laws actually don't have exceptions for any reason except the immediate danger of losing the life of the pregnant individual. This includes no exceptions for things like incest, sexual assault, rape, and even the general health and welfare of the pregnant individual. And we can see this when we look at different states. We have states like Alabama, Arizona, and Arkansas, which do not have rape exceptions. Arkansas has no exception for health. And this is what a lot of these states are doing in order to make it so that only the most exceptional case of immediate danger to life is something that can be protected. And even in some of those instances, which we'll get to, there's been a movement for certain politicians to claim that the life of the pregnant individual can only be protected if, people take the time, if the doctors take the time to protect the fetus as well and prioritize the fetus's life first and foremost. And it's ridiculous when we, take that, because that's not a life. That's not what's happening there. And, we should be prioritizing the life of the pregnant individual because they're here and they're alive. But this is what a lot of states have gone to. And even some of the less extreme pro-life people from back in the day would pale in comparison to some of the movements that we've seen in today's reality. Now, it's also worth noting that the line between life and health can also be a very blurry one based on the way that certain laws are written. It effectively makes it legally troubling for doctors to provide abortion even when pregnant individuals are in dangerous circumstances, because some doctors may want to protect their own financial interests rather than potentially put themselves at risk. And as a patient, that doesn't exactly instill confidence when you're creating this type of incentives for a medical professional. And getting back to some of the just strange perspectives of legislators in this country, there are some state legislators who have attempted to ban abortions for ectopic pregnancies. Now, ectopic pregnancies occur in approximately 2% of all pregnancies. These are dangerous pregnancies to carry to term. Basically, what happens is that the fetus ends up implanted onto the wrong part of the body for whatever reason. And if they're not terminated, it can lead to death in a lot of cases for both the parent and the fetus. Not that I consider the fetus alive, but if we're talking from that perspective, and for the population that I'm appealing to, and you potentially do at a certain point, that fetus is not going to survive. That's the reality of it, and you're just putting the parent at risk. And we actually have confirmation about this. At least 2 legislators have tried to implement this, and probably a lot more hold this type of perspective. We have here some recently considered bills have explicitly attempted to limit treatment of ectopic pregnancies. Legislation introduced in Ohio in 2019 would have required doctors to attempt to re-implant an ectopic pregnancy, which is medically impossible. This year, a Missouri bill severely restricting abortion access appeared to ban treatment of ectopic pregnancies. This language was removed after public outcry, and the sponsor of the bill said it had been misconstrued. Now, I don't believe for a moment that it was misconstrued. That's probably exactly what they were aiming for. And at the end of the day, this is the level of disconnect that we're seeing from a lot of these legislators who are trying to push for this, where they don't have anything grounded in medical science backing up their perspectives, and are literally going to take a form of pregnancy that is, again, occurs in 2% of all pregnancies and is incredibly dangerous and force a ton of people to just die rather than actually go through with it. And while that hasn't been passed, if some people are talking about it, that means that it's part of the plan in the near future. Now, these laws make no exceptions for the physical and psychological toll that these experiences might cause to people. And it seems that they're only heading in the direction of banning further exceptions and trying to make it so that effectively there will be no exceptions at some time. So, what we have here in all of this is that this one decision made by an authoritarian, undemocratic body of 9 judges who are politically motivated, that this decision by them will see livelihoods destroyed, bodily autonomy violated, people economically strained, desperation to the point of seeking out unsafe methods, mental and physical harm, sometimes to the point of death, state violence in the form of arrests, fines, and jail time, and unwanted pregnancies that will come to term as people are violently coerced by the state into becoming an incubator. All of this is going to take its toll on, first and foremost, pregnant individuals, but also families and the children born into these circumstances, and future generations, truly. This draft, when it becomes an official ruling, will be an immediate and present danger to the lives of many people, and to be honest, this is exactly how the conservatives planned it. So I really hope you'll join me next time, where I will spend some time talking about how the conservatives planned for this since the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973. With that said, if you've enjoyed what you watched, consider liking the video, subscribing, leaving a comment, and joining my Discord. Now, also, if you are in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, please do consider supporting me on Patreon, especially as political content like this can often lead to being demonetized by YouTube. The links for everything that I just mentioned are in the description down below. Thank you for your support and anything that you can provide, any comments or anything. It's always welcome to have a chat with the community. That said, my name is Anarchist Tara. Thank you for watching.